Here's a sobering fact to kick things off.
Mhm.
The United States has the dubious honor of having the highest incarceration rate globally.
Yeah.
We're talking about 573 individuals behind bars for every 100,000
Mhm.
residents. It really makes you question, what's going on within our criminal justice system.
It certainly does. And that number, as startling as it is, well, it really just opens the door to a much deeper conversation, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Today, we're diving into the critical intersection of social justice and the criminal justice system here in the U.S. We've gathered some vital research and analysis that shines a light on existing inequalities and, the ongoing efforts aimed at achieving meaningful change.
Exactly. And we've got a really interesting set of sources to explore. We'll be looking at the kind of in-depth analysis you find in academic publications, like those from Sage Journals,
Right, the academic angle.
alongside the focused advocacy and research highlighted by Northeastern University's examination of social justice in the criminal justice system. And in a fascinating twist, we're also going to delve into how true crime storytelling, particularly through the Criminal podcast, has emerged as, well, a surprisingly influential force in raising awareness around these really important issues.
What's particularly insightful, I think, is seeing how these diverse sources all point towards the same fundamental issues.
Yeah.
We have rigorous data-driven analysis alongside discussions of practical solutions, and then, the compelling power of narrative to connect with a much broader audience.
Right.
So our goal in this deep dive is really to extract the core insights from all of this, connect the dots in a clear way, and give you a solid understanding of the key aspects without hopefully overwhelming you.
We're aiming for those moments where things really click into place.
Exactly, those aha moments.
Okay, so let's really dig into the core of the issue by looking at the undeniable realities of systemic inequalities within the criminal justice system. The raw numbers themselves paint a pretty stark picture.
They really do. For example, the Sentencing Project has documented some deeply concerning racial disparities in state prison incarceration rates. Consider this.
Okay.
Black Americans are nearly 5 times more likely to be incarcerated than white Americans.
5 times, wow.
And for Latino individuals, that rate is 1.3 times higher. These aren't just small differences. They strongly suggest, fundamental issues within the system itself.
It really feels like these kinds of disparities don't just materialize out of thin air,
Right.
right? There's this concept people talk about, the cradle-to-prison pipeline. What's the core idea behind that?
That's a crucial framework, for understanding where these inequalities often take root. The cradle-to-prison pipeline describes how a combination of social and economic disadvantages can disproportionately channel young people, especially from minority backgrounds, to the juvenile justice system and ultimately the adult system. Things like limited access to adequate health care, underfunded public schools, and a societal emphasis, often on punishment over rehabilitation. They all play a role.
So it's a cycle.
It's a tragic cycle, where a lack of opportunity kind of becomes a direct pathway to incarceration for many young people of color.
It almost sounds like a self-perpetuating problem in certain communities.
Precisely. And the data really backs this up. Georgetown Law's Center on Poverty and Inequality, for instance, found that Black girls are almost 3 times more likely than white girls just to be referred to the juvenile justice system.
3 times more likely just for a referral.
Yeah. And, even more troubling, prosecutors are significantly more inclined, about 20% more likely, to request court orders in cases involving Black girls.
Okay.
And judges consistently hand down harsher judgments even when you control for the specifics of the cases.
That's incredibly disheartening. It's hard to imagine how someone caught in that kind of system can easily find a way out.
It is. Once someone has faced charges or been incarcerated, even as a juvenile, it sets in motion this really damaging cycle of poverty.
Right.
Finding stable employment becomes incredibly challenging, which, affects their ability to secure consistent housing, afford basic necessities.
And you mentioned even an arrest.
Yeah, even an arrest without a conviction can severely hinder future job prospects, makes it much harder to find work, often leading to lower paying jobs if they find one at all.
So it's not just about who ends up being sentenced, but also about who gets drawn into the system in the first place.
Exactly. This brings us to the issue of the criminalization of poverty and racial targeting. Individuals with lower incomes, and particularly people of color, are disproportionately targeted,
Uh-huh.
and they often face more severe consequences for minor offenses compared to those with greater financial resources.
We saw that with Ferguson, didn't we?
Absolutely. The Department of Justice report after Michael Brown's death in Ferguson really highlighted this. It showed how residents, particularly in predominantly black neighborhoods, were often viewed by authorities almost as potential offenders and, frankly, sources of revenue for the city.
Just reinforcing existing racial biases.
Exactly. That report was a stark reminder of how deeply these issues can be embedded, and further research into law enforcement practices has uncovered more subtle forms of bias, too. A comprehensive study on traffic stops, for instance.
Okay, what did that find?
It revealed that while black drivers were actually less likely to be stopped after dark, when their race was less apparent to the officer,
Interesting.
the bar for searching black and Latino drivers once stopped was demonstrably lower than it was for white drivers.
So, a lower threshold for suspicion based on race. It paints a picture of a system where bias, both conscious and perhaps unconscious, plays a significant role at multiple points of contact.
And these disparities aren't limited to who law enforcement targets. We also see significant differences in who becomes a victim of crime.
That's a really important point.
Yeah, LGBTQIA plus individuals, for example, experience higher rates of violence. To put it in perspective, lesbian and gay individuals are victimized at more than twice the rate of straight individuals,
Twice the rate.
and transgender individuals at 2.5 times the rate of cisgender individuals.
That's a critical aspect that often doesn't get enough attention in broader discussions about crime, I think.
It is, and these inequalities continue when we examine domestic violence. Bisexual individuals experience domestic violence at a rate 8 times higher than straight individuals.
8 times. That's huge.
It's staggering, and lesbian and gay individuals at more than twice the rate. Furthermore, research from Northeastern University has highlighted the increased targeting of Latino immigrants with bias-motivated crimes.
Wow.
They experienced a significant 62% increase in reported hate crimes between 2014 and 2018. And alarmingly, these incidents often go unreported,
Why's that?
often due to a lack of trust in authorities, a fear of deportation, things like that.
These are really concerning statistics. It's clear that ensuring social justice within the criminal justice system isn't just about the accused. It's also fundamentally about who the system effectively protects and serves.
Absolutely.
So, considering all these significant inequalities, what concrete steps are being taken? What's being done to bring about positive social change?
That's the essential next part of this discussion, right? Experts and advocates, including many at Northeastern University, are actively working to tackle these deeply rooted issues through various avenues.
Okay.
One crucial area is in the education of police officers. There's a recognized need for specific policies and training programs designed to eliminate disproportionate policing practices that unfairly target people of color.
Makes sense.
The fundamental aim here is, well, to rebuild the often fragile trust between law enforcement agencies and the diverse communities they serve.
And it sounds like these efforts aren't just based on good intentions. There's actual research guiding these changes, right?
Absolutely. The Northeastern study on bias victimization among Latinos, for instance, specifically recommended enhanced training for police on how to recognize and prevent these types of attacks, and also on building stronger, more trusting relationships with the Latino community.
Yep.
And Professor Eric Pizza at Northeastern also conducted an analysis of body camera footage from Newark, New Jersey. His findings indicated that even seemingly minor police actions could be predictive of the future use of force.
Really. Like low-level stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Which underscores the need for retraining that heavily emphasizes de-escalation techniques. Trying to stop things from escalating unnecessarily.
It's fascinating to see how data analysis can directly inform practical changes in policing on the ground.
Oh,
What about addressing that cradle-to-prison pipeline we discussed earlier? That seems so fundamental.
it really is. And Northeastern has established a dedicated cradle-to-prison pipeline project. It brings together experts from a variety of disciplines: law, criminology, sociology, public health.
A multidisciplinary approach.
Exactly, to gain a deeper understanding of the root causes and the far-reaching effects of youth criminalization. Professor Stephanie Roberts-Hartun and alumna Aaron Stewart conducted a survey of incarcerated individuals in Massachusetts. And their findings clearly demonstrated how children of color are disproportionately affected by the state's welfare, education, and criminal justice systems, significantly increasing their risk of ending up incarcerated.
So it connects all those systems.
Yes. The project's goal is to use this data to advocate for specific policy and legislative changes at crucial points of intervention in a child's life. They've even mapped the complex interactions between children and these various systems
Wow.
to pinpoint exactly where interventions can be most effective in diverting young people away from the prison pipeline.
That sounds like incredibly proactive work, really trying to get ahead of the problem at its earliest stages,
Mm,
which is so important.
definitely.
And what about individuals who are already within the system? Are there initiatives focused on their needs?
Yes, there are vital efforts in prison outreach and reform as well. For example, Northeastern University runs career support workshops specifically for inmates.
Okay, what do those involve?
They provide them with opportunities to develop valuable skills, build confidence for their eventual job search upon release, resume writing, interview skills, things like that.
Practical stuff.
Very practical. They also have a step-down program designed to prepare incarcerated individuals for successful reentry into society.
Step down.
Yeah, it gradually transitions individuals to lower security levels and provides additional support services during their final year of incarceration, preparing them for life outside.
That makes sense.
And researchers are even conducting cost-benefit analyses to see if the investment in these reentry programs leads to lower rates of reoffending, recidivism.
Right, which would benefit everyone.
Exactly. Benefits taxpayers, reduces crime, and more importantly, helps individuals rebuild their lives. They're studying the overall impact of the program on recidivism rates, that rate at which people return to criminal behavior after release.
It's really encouraging to hear about these tangible steps being taken at different points within the system. Now, we touched on it earlier, but the role that true crime has played in all of this, it feels somewhat unexpected, doesn't it?
It does, yeah, yet it's become a significant phenomenon. The Criminal podcast itself, which we mentioned, has explored this intersection and highlighted some really compelling case studies.
Like Serial.
Exactly like Serial. That podcast, which re-examined the case of Adnan Syed, had an enormous impact. By meticulously reviewing the evidence, raising serious questions about his legal representation, the fairness of the trial, it just captured the attention of millions.
And it wasn't just a passive listening experience, was it? It actually led to real-world legal consequences for Adnan Syed.
Absolutely. The intense public interest generated by Serial led to renewed legal scrutiny of his case, and ultimately, his conviction was vacated after he had spent 23 years in prison. It really highlighted the powerful potential of these true crime narratives to expose possible miscarriages of justice and, in turn, inspired a whole wave of similar investigative content.
It's almost as if storytelling became a catalyst for accountability in a way.
Precisely. Then you have the Netflix docuseries Making a Murderer, focusing on Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
It raised significant questions about potential misconduct by law enforcement, the possibility of coerced confessions, and it effectively brought discussions about systemic issues within the criminal justice system right into mainstream public consciousness.
The reaction was huge.
Immense, yeah. Widespread petitions, intense social media debates.
I vividly recall that series sparking a lot of really intense debate. It compelled people to question the system in a way that maybe more traditional presentations of data don't always achieve.
That's absolutely right. And then there's The Innocence Files, another series which took a slightly different approach by showcasing the vital work of the Innocence Project.
Right, focusing on wrongful convictions.
Exactly. It highlighted multiple cases of individuals who were wrongly convicted and the systemic factors that contribute to these tragic errors, things like unreliable forensic science, eyewitness misidentification, racial bias.
All major issues.
Absolutely. This series not only educated a broad audience, but also significantly increased public support for the Innocence Project itself and for policy reforms aimed at preventing future wrongful convictions.
So while these true crime stories often center on individual cases, they seem to have a much broader impact, drawing attention to these deeper systemic problems. But are there any potential downsides to this increased focus on true crime?
That's a really important question, and experts have certainly considered both the power and the potential pitfalls of true crime's role in advocacy. Dr. Sarah Weinman, a respected crime writer, she points out that while the emotional connection these stories create can foster empathy and understanding, which is good, there's also a risk of sensationalism and the oversimplification of very complex legal and social issues. She emphasizes the ongoing need for critical engagement with these narratives. Don't just passively consume them.
That's a valuable reminder. These are real people's lives we're talking about, not just, entertainment.
Absolutely. Professor Justin Brooks, who directs the California Innocence Project, recognizes the positive influence of true crime media, but also cautions against relying on it too heavily.
Okay.
He reminds us that genuine reform requires a deeper understanding of the underlying systemic issues and evidence-based solutions, not just compelling stories.
Right. Stories are powerful, but not the whole picture.
Exactly. And Dr. Nicole Rafter highlights the potential danger of inadvertently reinforcing harmful stereotypes through certain true crime portrayals. She underscores the importance of ensuring diverse voices are heard within this genre.
That's crucial, too.
However, Barry Scheck, a co-founder of the Innocence Project, emphasizes how true crime has undeniably broadened public conversations about the need for reform. It's helped to humanize what can often feel like abstract statistics for a much wider audience.
So it's like a double-edged sword, maybe?
Kind of, yeah. It sounds like a powerful tool, but one that definitely needs to be used responsibly and viewed with a critical eye.
Now, our sources also touched upon the idea that sometimes these high-profile cases, they can be interpreted as symptoms of more fundamental failures within the system itself, rather than just isolated incidents.
Yes, the article like Fetching Water with a Bucket Full of Holes explored this very idea. It examined how media coverage of certain cases, like the Stanford rape case
Right.
and the killing of Philando Castile, often sparked narratives that went beyond simply the outcomes within the criminal justice system.
How so?
Well, these particular cases ignited broader discussions about alternative approaches to justice and highlighted a pervasive sense of systemic failure. The media coverage, while often focused on the legal proceedings, also brought to the forefront public demands for more comprehensive social change.
Uh-huh.
And it raised questions about whether the criminal justice system alone is capable of delivering true justice in these complex situations.
It's that feeling, isn't it? That even when there's a legal resolution, whether it's a conviction or an acquittal, it doesn't necessarily address the underlying issues or the deeper sense that something is fundamentally not right.
Exactly. These high-profile cases often become focal points, revealing wider public perceptions of injustice that extend far beyond the confines of the courtroom.
So as we begin to wrap up this deep dive, it feels like we really covered a significant amount of ground. From the stark realities of systemic inequalities
Yeah.
to the ongoing and varied efforts for reform and the, well, somewhat surprising role that true crime narratives have come to play in raising public awareness.
We have. And the key takeaways, I think, are all interconnected. We see these deep-seated inequalities not just in incarceration rates, but also in routine interactions with law enforcement, even in who becomes a victim of crime.
Right.
There are dedicated and research-informed efforts underway to address these issues, improved police training, initiatives aimed at disrupting that cradle-to-prison pipeline, crucial prison reform programs. And then we have the undeniable influence of true crime narratives in bringing these complex issues to a much wider audience and advocating for change. Although it's vital, as we said, that we remain aware of the potential downsides and the need for critical engagement.
It all points to a really intricate and multifaceted challenge, doesn't it? There are no easy or quick fixes here.
Indeed. It requires sustained attention, critical thinking, and, frankly, a genuine willingness to consider diverse perspectives if we are to truly make progress towards a more just and equitable criminal justice system for everyone.
So here's a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. Given all the evidence of these deeply ingrained systemic issues and the undeniable power of public awareness, what do you believe is the most impactful way for individuals to contribute to building a more just and equitable criminal justice system? It's definitely something worth reflecting on.